Tom is a staunch atheist, and he walks up to his friend Abdullah one day and he says to him, science is the only way to truth. This is a fact, right? And Abdullah turns around and he looks at him and he smiles at him. And he says to him, this statement that you've just made, science is the only way to truth. Prove this to me scientifically. He can't. Why? Watch ahead and find out. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. Today we're going to be looking at Scientism. It's this worldview, this philosophy which underlies the scientific method today. We've discussed in previous episodes about the scientific method itself, what science is, what the limitations of science are, where you can apply science and how it works. Now what we're going to do is we're going to look at the underlying philosophy or the ideas and worldviews behind science that drive science and drive atheists that hold on to science and almost make it seem like their own God, right? So what is scientism? And I believe scientism is the biggest problem we're facing today when it comes to science, Islam and atheism. So scientism is the idea that atheists have that science is the only way to truth. And it comes from naturalism, or the naturalistic worldview. And again, I'm going to explain these terms. Naturalism is the view that everything that exists and everything that caused everything that exists is physical. It's all a closed physical system. There's no supernatural, there's no non-physical realities. It's all physical. There's nothing beyond the physical. There are no gods, there are no creators, there's no supernatural beings. This is what naturalists believe, okay? And when a naturalist, and in extension sometimes an atheist, well, there's a slight difference, we can discuss this later, but when a naturalist or an atheist approaches science or becomes a scientist or promotes the scientific method, his underlying assumption of the method is this, of naturalism, and that leads to scientism. And scientism, therefore, is the idea that science is the only way to truth. Why? Why do naturalists hold on to this? Because, as we've discussed before, science only deals with what's observable, the physical world, the physical reality, right? It only deals with the physical, observable things. So, why is this claim? Science is the only way to truth, scientism. Why is it false? Why is it wrong? Why does it break down? Well, for several reasons. Firstly, brothers and sisters, it's self-defeating, okay? Secondly, it can't account for mathematical and logical truths. Thirdly, science can't deal with moral truths. It's amoral. And finally, science can't deal with testimony, and science relies upon testimony as it relies upon mathematical and logical truths too. So we're going to look at these things in a bit more detail. So let's look at, why is this statement of scientism self-defeating? Why is this statement, science is the only way to truth, self-defeating? Here's why. When you make the statement, science is the only way to truth, what you're saying is, we don't know anything. There is no truth except what comes from science, okay? Now, if this is true, then how do you prove a statement that you've made scientifically? That statement itself is not something physical that you can test or observe in a laboratory or in a test tube. And if this is the case, then the statement breaks down, then scientism breaks down. So if science is the only way to truth, then science is not the only way to truth because of the very statement itself. So it's self-defeating. It breaks down, it holds no water. And we can stop there, but we're going to carry on. Next, science can't deal with mathematical and logical truths. Take the laws of logic. They're not something physical or material. You can't touch the law of non-contradiction. The law of non-contradiction is this. This watch on my hand can't be on my hand and not be on my hand at the same time in the same way. It's either on my hand or it's not on my hand, right? This is a law of non-contradiction. These are universal laws which apply across the universe. But the point is this, the law itself is not something physical. You can't touch it or feel it or taste it. In the same way, numbers, mathematics, science can't deal, it can't answer the question of numbers. How does the number 1 taste? Right? How does the number 2 smell? How heavy is number 3? You can't weigh these things. They don't have physical properties. Therefore, science can't observe these realities. And we know they exist. We use mathematics. Science relies on mathematics. Science needs mathematics to carry out calculations, especially in fields like astronomy, right? And physics and so on and so forth. Next, Science is amoral, and we've discussed this before. It can't tell you about moral truths, moral values and duties. You know, is it right to help the elderly cross the road, the old elderly woman cross the road? Is it good to give charity? Is it evil to hurt someone or harm someone unjustly? These questions science can't answer because moral values and duties are not physical things. They're not physical realities. So science has no say in that either. So, brothers and sisters, here's the thing. If science can't deal with mathematical and logical truths, it can't deal with moral truths, it's self-defeating as a statement itself, then how can you even claim that science is the only way to truth? It's not. Finally, and this is one of the key points we need to understand, testimony is another route to knowledge, right? And you can't deny this, because if you deny testimony, then you have to deny science itself, because science relies on testimony. Because here's why. Say scientist X, Mr. X, in the 1600s did some experiments and came up with a theory, okay? Scientist X passes away. 100 years later, scientist Y comes along and he picks up on what scientist X did and he develops this theory further, or gets rid of it and replaces it with another. But for him to do this, he has to rely on the testimony of scientist X, the written works of scientist X, right? So science is heavily dependent on testimony, right? For example, take any given scientist who believes in the theory of evolution or the Darwinian mechanism. He himself hasn't conducted all of the experiments within the field, but he's relying on the testimony of other scientists that have done work previously to him that he picks up on and he carries on with. Testimony is another key route to knowledge. And here's another way of proving this. Ask yourselves the question, do you believe China exists? Now some of you, all of you may say, yes, China exists, okay? How do you know China exists? Because most of us have not been to China, right? We've not been there, we've not seen it. How do we know it exists? How are we so certain? We haven't observed it ourselves, but we believe it exists. Why? You may say, well, I've seen pictures of China, Google Maps, I've seen video footage from China, you know, I've seen satellite images of China. But again, this is testimonial. You're relying on the person that provides you with this evidence that it's true. You haven't, unless you've seen it and observed it yourself, you're relying on testimony. So testimony is a key route to knowledge. And even science relies upon testimony. So again, to conclude, science is the only way to truth, is to do away with testimony, this amazing route to knowledge, which science relies upon, and science again crumbles, right? So to make such a statement of scientism is to destroy science itself. So we need to realize this, brothers and sisters, and share this with others so they understand this reality too. So brothers and sisters, to conclude, we need to understand something. All of these ideas that surround science, everything that's going on with science today in the 21st century, most of it's misinformation. And especially when it comes to Muslims, we're not informed about these things, and we need to understand these realities to reclaim the scientific method and to do justice to the method itself. We have atheists out there, individuals like Richard Dawkins, for example, who promote the idea that science is the only way to truth, it's absolute, we don't need religion, we have science, it tells us how and why things work, and we've covered these things in previous episodes. But what we need to do as Muslims is we need to understand this information. We need to understand that science is revisable, science can change, it's based on things like induction, which can't give you absolute truth. We also have to understand that science gives us the how and not the why, as we've also previously discussed. We also, brothers and sisters, have to understand that science isn't the only way to truth, as we've discussed in this episode. There are many routes to knowledge, and as Muslims we know this. Our route to knowledge is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We believe revelation comes directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that revelation is absolute truth. What we have from Allah is absolute truth. What we have from science is speculative and it changes, you know. Like I said before, the truth, when scientists use the word truth, we have discovered a truth or we have a fact. And when we as Muslims use the word fact or truth, it's two different levels. It's two different levels. Because we know the truth in science can change. They're not absolute. But we know that the truth from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is absolute and unchanging. And this is why, brothers and sisters, a key point I want to conclude on. Many of us, brothers and sisters, in schools and universities, even our children in many cases, are becoming a bit disorientated with this reality. We're being taught science in school, which is not a bad thing, it's a good thing. But because we don't understand science and the method itself and the limits of it, what's happening is this. Science says X, the Qur'an says Y, we start worrying. Oh my God, science has just said this, it goes against the Qur'an, what do? We panic because we don't know what science is. But if we watch these episodes and we understand the reality of science, that it's limited, it's a good method, it's a beautiful method, but it's limited, it can change, it can't tell us about everything, it's revisable. If we understand these realities and we understand that the Qur'an is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Qur'an is absolute, it's unchanging, right? It doesn't change. And if we understand this reality, whenever there's a discrepancy between the two, whenever science makes a claim, X, for example, and then the Qur'an says Y, we don't panic anymore, right? We don't worry, we don't freak out, because now we know science is changing, it's revisable, there are no absolute truths in the scientific method. The Qur'an is absolute, it's from Allah, the creator of the heavens and the earth. So whenever science says something which doesn't fit what the Qur'an says, it doesn't matter, because we know science will eventually catch up, because science will continue to revise itself and it will continue to change. And understanding this reality, brothers and sisters, we put things into perspective. Everything makes sense. So brothers and sisters, make sure that we learn about the scientific method, because it will allow us to understand reality in this correct perspective. We can educate our children, our families, and on top of this, we can educate others. We can educate that crazy atheist that may come up to you and say, we have science, we don't need your backward religion, you don't need to follow this anymore, you don't need to be religious anymore. No, we need to show them, if anything, Islam allows, it gives the correct values that allows for science to progress and flourish in the correct way. And it doesn't suffocate science like atheism and naturalism does, right? So if we want the scientific method to progress, we as Muslims need to step up and take hold of the method again and progress with it, inshallah. Jazakallah khair for listening, brothers and sisters. Hopefully this has been beneficial. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.